Strong-willed, by definition, is being determined to do something regardless of what is advised against it. And the mindset is really a double-edged sword, because the positive aspect of being strong-willed means that we will pursue a goal or a thought process, and nothing will get in the way of us following that path. This can work for a person in every arena of their life, and they can be incredibly productive if they are strong-willed and with their goal set on something like that. But obviously the other side of the sword is we can be so determined to accomplish our goal that we sever relationships, that we slaughter the innocent, and yes, at times shut out the voice of God in some matters. I mean, we can become so set on what we want that we won't listen to anyone. And as the kingdom of David is being established, we read of the scoundrels, the men who were bent on their own strong will and trust being questioned. First, there was Saul's commander-in-chief, Abner. He had his right-hand man. He was his right-hand man. And upon his death, he then manipulated on Saul's death, he manipulated and swayed the 11 tribes to follow after his one son, who kind of was a no-name named Ishbosheth, and make him king. And you talk about being strong-willed. And so now Abner had his own puppet king, and he had a paper tiger or a Manchurian candidate, whatever you want to call it. Abner simply pulled the strings, and Ishbosheth did as Abner dictated. And that was until it began to get a little too full of himself, that Abner, which can happen when people become so determined to get what they want. And so things soured between him and Ishbosheth. And Ishbosheth actually accused him of taking Saul's concubine for his own. And so upon threats of this conversation, as Anthony unpacked for us last week, Abner went to David and he put all of his allegiance to him now and leadership. And things, they looked good for kind of a hot minute until they divided country was being united, until Joab, David's commander, gets wind of Abner's actions. And so, as Anthony again led us through last week, Joab waited for the right moment, and he decided then to take revenge on Abner for killing his brother, and then in turn snuffed Abner's life out. And it was really that eye for eye, blood for blood type of thing. And you see, even though Joab was all in for David, had been with him for years while on the run even, he was one who didn't necessarily listen to others. And he was strong-willed. And he held a determination of what to avenge his brother who had been killed, and to do whatever he could to make things right as far as his mind and his thinking went. And there's no doubt that all of us can struggle with being strong-willed at times. It's just a part of our human nature that we wrestle with from time to time in various situations. And it shows up in that it shows up in us in that unteachable spirit that we may hold on to when we're being challenged or corrected. It takes a head and shoulders above reason that is sometimes given to us. But because we want to do what we want to do, we refuse to listen. And we're going to do whatever we want, regardless of even well-given advice. And who pays? Who really pays for that determination of our strong will? And what are the outcomes of such? Well, in the end, honestly, we all do. We all pay for our own determination and strong will as we hurt others many times in the process. And we gain possibly a reputation as an unteachable person. And from that, then we kind of become labeled and are marginalized. Abner and Joab had their own determinations that they would do whatever they wanted and let the chips fall wherever they may. And Abner, for his part, in that self-determination, he divided the country of Israel and divided the nation as he crowned Ishbosheth king when he knew that David had been anointed. And because of his back and forth wavering when he didn't get what he wanted, when Ishbosheth confronted him, somebody took his ball and went home. Or in this case, he just trekked to Hebron to tell David that the north, we are solidly behind you. We're going to give you all of our allegiance. And then because of that, he lost his life. And treachery caught up with him. And for Joab, well, he was a wild child, determined not to even learn from his commander David, who again and again had modeled and graciously, almost annoyingly, spared Saul's life and defended him through so many opportunities that he could have taken him out. And even as Saul was mad crazy to kill David, David showed this enemy of his mercy over and over again. And being so close to someone, you would think that Joab picked up on David's relationship with his God and also learned a few things by his example. But when the chance was given, he succumbed to his human nature. He took revenge to avenge his brother, who was killed. And he was just as unteachable as the one who had snuffed out his brother's life. Both were strong-willed men, and both paid the price. And so as the dust settles for the people of Israel as a whole, there was still a lot of cleaning up and working things out to be done. So David is at this point, he is crowned king of Judah, the southern Israel. Ishbosheth is still the king of the north, and the nation is completely divided. And here is where we pick up. And here is where the plot, as they say, thickens. When Ishbosheth, verse 1 of chapter 4, when Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard about Abner's death at Hebron, he lost all courage, and all Israel became paralyzed with fear. Now there were two brothers, Bana and Rechab, who were captains of Ishbosheth's raiding parties. They were sons of Rimmon, the member of the tribe of Benjamin, who lived in Beeroth, and the town of Beeroth is now part of Benjamin's territory. And because the original people of Beeroth had fled to Gittim, where they all live as foreigners, where they still live as foreigners. And Saul's son, Jonathan, had a son named Mephibosheth, who was crippled as a child. He was 5 years old when the report came from Jezreel that Saul and Jonathan had been killed in a battle. And when the child's nurse heard the news, she picked him up and fled. But as she hurried away, she dropped him, and he became crippled. So let's stop here a moment. There's a couple things worth noting in these first 4 verses that kind of set the table. So because Ishbosheth had been propped up by Abner, who was now dead, he certainly could see the writing on the wall. And by all accounts, he was a weak man. He was a weak leader. His strength, you see, had come through Abner, who made him successful. And now that protection, really, that's the way to put it, was dead, he's potentially free game. The other aspect to consider here is simply he trusted in a man to help him in his leadership. He lost heart because we're not aware ever of any real relationship that he held with God. And there are probably a lot of mistakes that Ishbosheth made throughout even this entire ordeal, but this one is really the greatest. His lack of relationship with God meant that the one who could work in his situation and at least bring some form of peace of mind and direction and wisdom, it wasn't there. Because he had no faith. And he had no relationship. And realistically, had he had the relationship, he more than likely would have given of himself, he wouldn't have given of himself to Abner to begin with when caught up as becoming the king. But because all of these things were decided by his own emotions, And let me tell you, when we let our emotions drive our actions, oh, we can be in trouble. So because he decided things by his own emotions, by his own thinking, by listening to someone who had his ear, his own pride, now things are crumbling. And ironically, in this, we don't read where, even at this moment, we don't read anywhere in these first four that he turned to the Lord for help, for direction, for wisdom. It really says everything. I say a lot, and I really mean it. I don't know how people handle life without God. I really don't. I do not. Life is hard. It is. It takes the most unexpected turns so much of the time, and sometimes the heartache that even maybe we're currently battling, some of us may be really battling some heartache today, may have come, those may have come from our own selfish desires or a lack of search for approval or guidance, or it's just because life is hard. And many of us could testify to the fact that in our own situations, when the news was terrible, when the death happened, when the fallout of mistakes we got made caught up with us, we turn to God. Many of us have done this. And our Lord Jesus, who is right beside us in the things by his Spirit, in turn gifts us with a peace that we could never manufacture, that enables us to continue to navigate and kind of proceed through. And he sustains us in the crisis and leads us as we ask. Many of us here, we have experienced this rescue, per se, from God in those situations. And if only Ishbosheth had some form of relationship with God, things may have still gone south on some level, sure. But the Lord's presence would lead him through that transitional period. And he shouldn't have been on the throne anyway, because it was God's intention that David be there, but he would have had some help from his God in navigating. Realistically, Ishbosheth took his courage from another man. And when that person and their strength was gone, he collapsed in fear. Crisis, pressure tends to do that, doesn't it? And then fear paralyzes us. Are you facing a mountainous situation at the moment? Are there warning signs of trouble ahead? Has stress taken over a situation in your life that it's really kind of all you're eating and breathing right now? Hear me, as someone who's been there, just like you, when there's so much frustration and when there's fears and when there's uncertainty, my help during those times, my peace and direction only came from the Lord. Only. It didn't come from even the wise counsel that maybe was good. It came when I really leaned into the Lord in this situation. And it didn't come necessarily by the situation resolving. It came in the middle of it, maybe where you're at. So if this is something you've been wrestling with, turn to him. Surrender. Open yourself up and your will to him in the situation. Ask. Here it is. Ask for wisdom and discernment, which is so ironic that Anthony used that as our segue into prayer. Pray for his protection. And above all, engage with your Lord, because he loves that when we do this. You know, I remember particularly when I was faced with something that was doing just this, and I was paralyzed. And I was before my God over and over again, bringing that situation to him. And I prayed all these things that I've mentioned above. I was praying for wisdom and for discernment. And I was definitely praying, Lord, please protect me, and begged him to take every thought that I had captive. You see, fear was realistic. It was at my doorstep. And the terror of all the, well, what if? What if this happens? Those words were deafening to me. And so I asked him to take every thought, fearful thought, and the turmoil to him. And there were moments, several minutes, which turned to hours, that I was pleading with him to take the fears and take captive all the worst scenarios the enemy was placating in my mind. So what did that look like? I would be before him and I'd say, Lord, I don't want to be thinking these things. I want to trust you in this. I'm going to lean into you. And then I would feel this peace. Let's say that I would begin to feel it. And I'd go about a little bit, and then maybe 5 minutes later, it would really creep back into my mind. And I'd be like, okay, Lord, I need you to take captive these thoughts that are crippling me and making me become so fearful. That's what that looked like, in taking every thought captive and bringing it before him. In essence, even though I didn't realize it, this was me in my own way, putting my faith in action and turning to him, hear this, instead of me trying to figure it out. Because quite honestly, I couldn't have figured it out if I wanted. So again, if you are in a situation right now, this is that moment, folks, where Jesus can shine in your life and bring you the peace that you need right now. Engage, I'm begging you, engage with him. Allow him to work. Surrender again and again the fears, and go back again and again and pray for him to take those thoughts captive that are crippling you from your faith in trusting him, and plead for the very Spirit of God in your life, despite everything else, to shine and bring the peace. Yes, he is molding you through this, but beyond that, he's refining your faith. So keep this in mind as well. Your God has not forgotten you at all, even though it may seem so dark at the moment. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, trust him, because he is right alongside of you. The second thing about this chapter is we learn of an additional grandson of Saul. Kind of the first time. This was Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth. What in the world is up with these guys' names? I'm serious. So Mephibosheth is the very last descendant of Saul who holds a legal claim to the throne. And at the time, he's a terribly unfortunate story that is attached to his name, which caused him being lame or crippled. And this story, really, it's an introduction to Mephibosheth, is a tease of sort of what is to come in the next few weeks. And it's a great story that we'll be reading about that then. But here we have Ishbosheth living in fear. His strength has dissipated. All of Israel itself is terrified. And this becomes a breeding ground for something sinister. For yes, treachery is about to show itself again. And so one day, Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon from Beeroth, went to Ishbosheth's house around noon as he was taking his midday rest. And the doorkeeper, who had been sifting wheat, became drowsy and fell asleep. So Rechab and Baanah slipped past her. They went into the house and found Ishbosheth sleeping on his bed, and they struck and killed him and cut off his head. And then taking his head with them, they fled across the Jordan Valley through the night. So the sad reality is the story of Ishbosheth didn't gain any real loyalty among his troops, even during the short-lived reign. They were only loyal to him when they thought he was strong, which was really, again, he was relying on Abner's strength, not his. And remember from last week, before Abner's death, he had defected to David and declared him, "You are the king of Israel." The fact that the fear polarized Ishbosheth was weakness and led then the two men to brutally murder him. And it's worth noting well what the writer of this book states. They were sons of Rimmon from Beeroth, which meant they were Benjaminites, which meant they were part of Saul's tribe, which meant they were kin to Ishbosheth. These two men murdered not only the king, but their family. If these two reckless men who decided to take things into their own hands think they will be national heroes, well, they're about to have a rude awakening. And so when they arrived in Hebron, they presented Ishbosheth's head to David. "Look," they exclaimed to the king, "here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of your enemy Saul, who tried to kill you. Today the Lord has given my Lord the king revenge on Saul and his entire family." But David said to Rechab and Baanah, "The Lord, who saves me from all my enemies, is my witness. Someone once told me Saul is dead, thinking he was bringing me good news, but I seized him. I killed him at Ziklag. That's the reward I gave him for his news. So how much more should I reward evil men who have killed an innocent man in his own house and on his own bed? Shouldn't I hold you responsible for his blood and rid the earth of you?" So David ordered his young men to kill him, and they did. And they cut off their hands and their feet and hung their bodies beside the pool of Hebron. And then they took Ishbosheth's head and buried it in Abner's tomb in Hebron. Well, I would say these two men's dreams of being a hero was literally killed through their justification. Note they're claiming to, I think it's interesting, they're claiming to be God's servants in their reasoning. That's so interesting. You see, they assumed that God's approval of their deed, which was foreign completely to David's thoughts. He hadn't thought of Saul. I mean, let me just refresh our memory here. David had never thought of Saul as his enemy. In fact, recall back to the song that he composed after his death of him and then of involving his son Jonathan as well as best friend. It clearly showed that although Saul had set himself up as David's enemy, David himself didn't see him that way. And Rechab and Baanah underestimated David's loyalty to God and to the house of Saul. And David had made a pledge all the way back in 1 Samuel during his very last encounter that he had with Saul when he spared his life once again, that he would honor and preserve Saul's family and descendants. And so let's take a look at that briefly. And this is Saul speaking as the scene opens. Saul says, "Now I realize that you surely are going to be king, and that the kingdom of Israel, it will flourish under your rule. Now swear to me by the Lord that when that happens, you will not kill my family or destroy my line of descendants." And so David promised this to Saul with an oath. And then Saul went home. But David and his men went back to the stronghold. You see, David would not accept these two men's evil deed, even though it seemed to serve in a purpose of bringing Israel even in unity under David's reign as king. And so swiftly he made an example of these murderous men, and ultimately by this act of justice, David showed all of Israel he was a decided enemy to anyone who would set their hearts on the destruction of Saul's family. No one now from forward could lift a finger toward any of his descendants, or they'd find the same punishment. And what we see here really is a collision of two different kingdoms. Humanity's kingdom, which operates within an attitude of power and opportunity, Oh, the leaders of today grab life by the horns and they strive for absolute control. And let me tell you, in ancient times, it was no different. Nothing has changed at all in the world. To help a new king ascend into power was considered opportunistic, especially if you believe that the new king is more powerful than the current one. And humankind always wants to be on the side with the greatest power. These men assumed that David reciprocated their values. These two men believed only the strong survive. And so they thought David preferred to take revenge on Saul and had not had the opportunity. But you see, David didn't think in the terms of this kingdom of man. He exemplified in his decisions, in his life, that of living for the kingdom of heaven. He didn't need mobsters to put a hit on his next victim. He didn't operate like that. David vowed to wait on the living Lord and had experienced enough in life to witness God's unbelievable faithfulness. And so by ordering the death of these two, he extended in that moment a justice to Saul's family, only one now that we're aware of remaining. And even though they were against him, David's highest priority was making sure that he, hear this, wasn't against God and what God wanted. Go back to that strong-willed. How often are we so strong-willed that it doesn't matter what the Lord is saying, we're going to do it regardless? David knew that for all these years, he would one day be king. Samuel had anointed him in the presence of his dad and his brothers. He had lived a life of steadiness for the most part, even though he had opportunities to force a kingship to happen. David waited on God to do the promoting. He trusted God to work out the circumstance. And he's doing that right before our eyes with what we're reading. Although these chapters here of late have shown the full kingdom right there, right within his grasp, right? He's still waiting for God to make that happen. He was not going to attempt to force the hand of God concerning his will. And so finally, it came. And what a moment. 2 Samuel 5, then all the tribes of Israel, they went to David at Hebron and told him, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, when Saul was our king, you were the one who really led the forces of Israel. And the Lord told you, you will be the shepherd of my people Israel. You will be Israel's leaders." So there at Hebron, King David made a covenant before the Lord with all the elders of Israel, and they anointed him king of Israel. And David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in all. He had reigned over Judah from Hebron for 7 years and 6 months, and then from Jerusalem he reigned over all Israel and Judah for 33 years. Finally, right? It's finally come. The elders of Israel received David's leadership because it was evident to them that God had called him to lead. And it was there that they anointed him king, which, by the way, this is his third anointing now as a king. Now, what's so interesting is 1 Chronicles actually describes this very event with an incredibly impressive army that came to Hebron, and the numbers of the amount of soldiers that came that day, I'm not reading the whole chapter, but you could look it up in 1 Chronicles 12, was 340,000 men that marched to Hebron. Imagine this. And Chronicles then gives us a snippet of what happened that Samuel did not record. Take a look. All these men, they came in battle array to Hebron with a single purpose of making David the king over all of Israel. In fact, everyone in Israel agreed that David should be their king. And they feasted and drank with David for 3 days. For preparations had been made by their relatives for their arrival, and the people from as far away as Issachar, Zebulun, Naphtali, brought food on donkeys, camels, mules, oxen, vast supplies of flour, fig cakes, clusters of raisins, wine, olive oil, cattle, sheep, goats were brought to the celebration, and there was great joy throughout the land of Israel. It's such a beautiful picture. Timeline-wise, the celebration came 7 years after Saul had been killed, but it did come. The people of God recognized David as their king. And most significantly, David never forced his reign on the people. He waited until they were willing and they came to him as God orchestrated it all. At 30 years old, the prophecy came true. David waited. And even though at times he did act within his own human nature, through all those years, he would find himself again and again back in the presence of God as he made things right, as he confessed his wrong and got back on the page that God was directing. David was 15 when that flask was broken that day, and the oil by Samuel was poured on his head, and he would spend 15 years in preparation for the throne of Israel, which is a beautiful statement of what we saw in Chronicles of what it looked like. So here's the takeaway. Whatever the dreams or the hopes that we have, whatever the desires we believe that God has placed within and spoken specifically, there is wisdom in waiting for his timing. Folks, forcing the hand of God never works. Never. Being strong-willed in attempting to make something happen without God's blessing, it will bring heartache, possibly collapse. Considering David and all he went through up to this point, it's an incredible thought that he was so committed to God's purposes and remained open through those years and yielded for him to work out that very purpose God had for his life, even though it took longer than he'd hoped for. Let me tell each of us, let God do the promoting of where he wants to take us. For if God has promised, it will come to pass. In the meantime, our duty, remain steady. Stay open. Stay obedient. Search for wisdom and discernment. Stand with me. Lord God, thank you for this story. Finally, we're there. Finally, it's so awesome. Father, I just pray that in these moments you meet us where we're at. We have come in with a lot of different things on our heart, a lot of different things that are pulling at us. And I pray that in this moment that we would just redirect and recenter ourselves back to you, your will, what you're doing in the middle of this, that we would seek you and your wisdom and your discernment. Lord, you've not forgotten us. We may feel that way. You have not. Remind us of your presence. In Jesus' name.